Hey friends, greetings and blessings to you. I'm Joel Richardson. So as you all can imagine, over the past few weeks since the Russian invasion of Ukraine, Dalton Thomas and I, who we've been working through the book of Revelation together, we've been somewhat flooded, I know I have, with requests saying, Joel, when are you going to share an update on your opinion concerning what's unfolding in Ukraine? Are you going to do a prophetic update on this sort of thing? And so what Dalton and I have decided to do is just take a couple or maybe a few sessions to talk about this. So I'm going to do one, Dalton's going to jump back in, and my guess is we're both going to share our opinions from pretty different angles. I think, we've talked a bit and we're in agreement in a general way, but I'm really actually looking forward to some of Dalton's insights. He lives in Israel and he's able to sort of understand things from a bit more of an Israeli perspective. Of course, a high percentage of Israelis are Russian or even Ukrainian Jews, and so it's going to be a very different perspective than probably what you're going to get in the United States. And what I'm going to do here is jump in, touch on a few different things. Okay, so as is common, anytime there's some massive event like this in the news, in the world, all of the Bible teachers, the prophecy teachers, they jump out, they make these YouTube videos or they do sermons, and they try to connect world events with biblical prophecy, or they do connect world events with biblical prophecy. And that's what many of you look to this particular channel for, regardless as to where you see this. And let me just say this before we jump in. I'm actually going to give away the punchline to the entire message. Yes, I'm going to talk a bit about how I view this from a biblical prophecy perspective. Yes, I'm going to talk a bit about the geopolitical realities on the ground. I'm going to sort of analyze it from a political and geopolitical perspective. But as Christians, as followers of Jesus, let me just make this statement very clear. Our primary focus, our highest focus, our first focus should not be on trying to understand what this means prophetically. It should not primarily be about trying to understand the reality so that we can know which team to root for. Who are the good guys and who are the bad guys? Our primary focus should be on how can we, in this current moment, in this age really, of chaos, of confusion, of absolute chaotic confusion, of hatred, of xenophobia, of racism, and far worse than all of these things, bloodshed. In this moment of all of these things, how can we as followers of Jesus walk, speak, and act righteously? What should we be focused on? And that should be the primary issue that we're churning over in our minds and in our hearts and our spirits. And so by the grace of God, let me say this, I just have it's going to be sort of a free-flowing stream of consciousness. I've got a few notes here and some scriptures, but by the grace of God, I can communicate this clearly and it will flow smoothly. Yes, I'm going to touch a bit on the sort of prophetic perspective. I'm going to touch on some of the geopolitical realities, but my main heart here is to communicate this exhortation that's in my heart, and I believe it's in the Lord's heart. I'll actually say this, I actually believe this is a word from the Lord. And as I said, I hope that I can communicate it clearly. So first, let me just begin by saying this. Now, obviously, the popular view throughout much of the evangelical world, particularly the American evangelical world, and this has been taught popularly for probably over 150 years now. You didn't really see it before 150 years ago, but after the time of Wilhelm Gesenius, he was the great Hebrew lexicographer, a Hebrew scholar, so to speak, who wrote the Hebrew lexicon, which is just referred to as Gesenius's Hebrew lexicon. Since that time, there's been a lot of popular talk in, again, this sort of I don't know if evangelical, let's just say in the Protestant prophecy-focused world, this idea that the prophecy of Ezekiel 38 and 39, often referred to as the Battle of Gog and Magog, that this is referring to Russia. Okay, so you'll hear this taught, again, widely said today in the evangelical world. People will actually say that Putin is Gog and Russia is Magog. And so therefore, of course, when you see Russia on the move militarily, and what's happening, by the way, let me just state this very clear, is huge. Like a modern industrialized first world, like Russia invading Ukraine, nothing like this has happened in my lifetime. I just turned 50. And even well before my lifetime, like in my father's lifetime, nothing like this has happened. Like this is the most significant, momentous event since World War II. And there's been a lot of significant events that have unfolded in the world, right? Like throughout this whole time period. This is huge, and it has the potential to absolutely spiral out of control, to be a cascading mess in proportions that we can't even fathom. It has the potential. I'm not saying it will, but it absolutely has that potential. And so this is very important that we take some time to drill down and discuss this. Now, as I said, this is sort of the popular view that's taught throughout much of the evangelical world, that Russia is Magog. And in fact, you'll even hear, for example, Joel C. Rosenberg, a very popular teacher and author, lives in Israel. He often actually refers to Putin as Gog. Like that's a very significant sort of statement or even claim to make. But this is sort of where much of the evangelical world is today. Now, let me just say this. I don't believe that at all. And it's not because it's my opinion. I believe that a very careful exposition of the scriptures point not to Russia, but they point instead to Turkey. They point, in terms of this battle of Gog-Magog, they speak of a Turkish-led Middle Eastern and North African coalition of nations that will invade the land of Israel in the last days. And in fact, Gog is the Antichrist. Gog is the Antichrist that will come from the region of Turkey, yea, maybe Syria or Iraq, but that general part of the world, and that this great end-time dictator, this military leader, will rise up and gather and reunite, so to speak, a coalition of nations that will invade the land of Israel. And the scriptures teach, of course, that Jesus will return and defeat these armies and save his people 2 minutes to midnight. At the last moment, he'll save his people and, of course, redeem his people, restore the kingdom to Israel, all of these things. So this is what the Bible teaches. Now, I don't have time to go through all of the details in terms of why I believe that's what the scriptures clearly teach. I will simply say this. I have taught on this in a series of very brief, what we're calling them end-time talks, over the past few weeks. So if this interests you, you can go back on this YouTube channel or on the FAI app. They're all posted, and just go through all the videos. I probably have done maybe 8 or 9 of them. I'm not sure. There's been a whole bunch, and kind of work through those things. Let me just say this very briefly. I'll sort of touch on this now. When you look at the prophecy of Ezekiel 38 and 39, there's this big list of nations. You have the leader, who is Gog. He's called Gog. That's probably a title. And he is from the land of Magog. And then it lists, it says he's the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. He's also the ruler, the commander over Gomer and the house of Togarmah, as well as Persia, that's Iran, Cush, and Put. Okay, so you've got these list of nations, and that's not comprehensive, by the way. Then it goes on and it says, and many nations with you. Many nations with you. Okay, so it lists all of these nations. There are 2 primary methods of understanding and interpreting these names. And again, I teach on this in a bit more detail in the End Time Talks. And by the way, let me just say this as well. I have 3 chapters in which I get into this in great detail in my book, Mideast Beast, which is free, available online on my website, on joelstrumpet.com. It's also available for free on the Frontier Alliance International app. And it's available in multiple languages, by the way. I put the PDFs out there for everyone to read. So if you want to dig into this in much more detail, then I would say dig into the book, Mideast Beast. If you want to go through the videos, then go back to the End Time Talks, because they're available, again, whether it be on the YouTube channel or on the Frontier Alliance International app. Okay, so, but I'm just going to touch on this because this is one point that is worth reiterating in this particular video. So when it comes to all of these names, there are 2 primary methods of understanding these names. One is what is called the historical grammatical method. It's a very simple method. Where were these peoples and these names when Ezekiel issued the prophecy? During Ezekiel's day, how did he and his immediate audience understand these names? And clearly, if you go into any commentary, any number of Bible atlases, you'll see that Ezekiel and his audience would have understood these names to be, again, a Turkish, there's a tremendous Turkish emphasis, a sort of Turkish top-heavy emphasis on this coalition of nations, but it involves, yes, Iran, Libya, Sudan. It's sort of the nations that surround Israel. It's sort of the outer perimeter of really the known world at the time of Ezekiel. And that's how they would have understood this prophecy. So what we do is we go, okay, this is how the prophecy was understood when it was given. And then we just simply correlate these names. Yes, they're ancient names, but where are they referring to today? Again, so Magog, Meshech, Tubal, this is Asia Minor. Anatolia, this is modern-day Turkey. So that's where we look today. We look to the modern-day Republic of Turkey. We look to Iran. We look to Libya, Sudan, etc. Okay? That's the historical grammatical method. I would argue that is the responsible method of understanding these names. Now, on the other hand, the method that's often used in popular evangelical prophecy interpretation is what I call the DNA bloodline historical wild goose chase. And that's where we utilize all of the resources that we have in terms of ancient historians and different things, and we do this real deep dive and we say, okay, so Ezekiel issued his prophecy, let's just say roughly 500 years before Jesus. That's very loose. And about 500 years later, Josephus, Josephus, who was the historian, lived a little bit after Jesus, but in the first century during the fall of Jerusalem, he said that the Magogians became the Scythians. So this is an example of ferreting out different information in the historians that we have at our disposal. So we go, okay, so the Magogians are the Scythians. Now, let me just say this. Scythian is like a super broad term. It's almost like saying barbarians or Caucasians. You know, like it's referring to a nomadic group of people. They were primarily archers, but it refers to like all kinds of different peoples. Like it was not one little narrow group of people, and they were like all over the world. They were down in the Middle East, they were in Egypt, they were in Turkey, like they've been all over the place. But by the time of Josephus, many of the Magog peoples, they migrated out of Turkey, so from your perspective, out of Turkey into the nations of modern-day nations, the regions of Bulgaria, Romania, the Ukraine, and then across the top of the Black Sea into modern-day Russia. And then eventually these Scandinavian Rus peoples came down. They intermarried. They spread all the way over to Asia, and they became the Russians. Okay, so this is sort of the historical argument that's used. And so people will say today, so when Ezekiel said Magog, he was talking much more ethnic DNA, bloodline. The Magogians are the Russians. Now you could also trace the Scythians, if you say that the Russians are the ancient Scythians, you can trace them all the way over to China. You can trace them all the way into Europe, down into the Middle East. Like they went in multiple directions. But let's just say that we stick with that argument. My point is this. If you want to do that with one of the names, you have to do it with all of them. And so I always like to point out, for example, let's just say you take one of the other names, Gomer. Because all of these names, by the way, they are the Japhetic peoples. What I mean by that is of the sons of Noah, Japheth was one of the sons of Noah, and after the flood, after the ark came to rest and so forth, Japheth is basically the Caucasians, like more of the lighter-skinned white peoples of the world. And so what's interesting, if you trace, for example, you do the bloodline DNA historical wild goose chase with Gomer. Gomer became the Gemari. They were referred to as the Gemari. They later were referred to as the Sumerians. The Sumerians became people such as the Gauls, the French, the Germans, the Celts, the Irish. Okay, so it's real popular, again, in this sort of evangelical Western American centric sort of prophecy world to say, oh, Russia's going to invade Israel in the last days. But no one talks about the coming Irish invasion of Israel. And if you do this consistently with all the names, you end up with the entire Western world. You end up with South America, the United States, Australia, New Zealand, you name it. Like no one has ever written a book talking about the coming Guatemalan invasion of Israel. But if they were consistent, they would have to do that. Now, I've done very careful analysis of all of these authors, and my point is not to pick on any of them. You know, Hal Lindsey, like all of the big names. And if you really trace what they do is with one name, for example, Magog, they'll trace that up into Russia. But when it comes to some of the other names, they switch methods and they stick to the historical grammatical method, the sort of geographic correlation method. And they go, no, in Ezekiel's day, Gomer was over there in eastern Turkey, you know, in the regions of Azerbaijan and Armenia. And they go, so it's referring to that part of the world. And you go, wait a minute, you just switched methods. You can't use the historical bloodline DNA method with Magog and then use the historical grammatical method with the other names. It's like a card trick. It's like a magic trick, and most of the listeners don't even realize this. Okay, so the point is this. I would argue, and again, I do it in great detail in some of the other videos in my books, that Russia is not being spoken of in Ezekiel 38 and 39, an incredibly important Old Testament, looming, towering end-time prophecy. But let's get it right. Now, I've taught this, and so then people get frustrated with me, and they say, okay, Joel, so you're trying to say that Russia has no relevance whatsoever. And I go, I never said that in the least bit. What I'm saying is, let's interpret the Bible responsibly, and when the Bible emphasizes something, we don't adjust our interpretation of the text based on world events. We don't go, oh, world events are doing this, now I'm going to interpret the Bible differently. That's called newspaper exegesis. That's called eisegesis. That's where you're importing your view into the pages of the Bible. No, we want to exegete, we want to draw out of the Bible and then watch as the world conforms to the words of the ancient biblical prophets through which the Lord has spoken, right? Okay, so this is very important. Now, am I saying that Russia is not relevant? Of course not. Russia is a major geopolitical player. The Bible doesn't talk in any depth whatsoever about China. It doesn't. Like, you could point to a couple verses maybe that hint at China or Russia, but the bottom line is they are huge geopolitical players. The geopolitical horizon right now is dominated by Russia and China. Absolutely, they're incredibly relevant, but let's not confuse modern-day geopolitical understanding of where the world's going, you know, in terms of just the futurist interpretation and understanding and speculation of these things with biblical interpretation. Those things are two completely separate things. But I absolutely believe that Russia is a very relevant player on the world stage and that they will continue to be. That's just not what the Lord chose to emphasize through Ezekiel. So let's be very clear there. Okay, so that is, you know, sort of in a very simplified way, my understanding of what's unfolding in Ukraine as it relates to biblical prophecy. Now, what do I believe just from a general sort of geopolitical analysis? Again, speculative geopolitical analysis. And I've talked about this in some previous videos. I did a video on Afghanistan just after the American withdrawal from Afghanistan and how I believe that event, that just incredibly momentous event, will affect and impact the world. And I'm just going to summarize it this way. I believe that we very well may be stepping into the age of Western decline, like dramatic decline and humiliation. And it's much more than just Joe Biden's presidency. You know, yeah, he's asleep at the wheel and he's senile, and like, I get all that. And I don't care if you're a Biden supporter. This is really like objective, undeniable reality. He's not fit for office. I mean, mentally, again, my point here is not to pick on him. My father passed away a little less than 2 years ago, and he had advanced dementia. Like anyone that has cared for someone with dementia or Alzheimer's, you know the look in their eyes. You know the speech patterns and these type of things as this ramps up. There's no question that the President of the United States right now has early onset, has the early stages of dementia or Alzheimer's. There's no question about that. We're moving toward the age of Weekend at Bernie's. You know, they're just kind of propping him up, give him the teleprompter, and there's other people that are sort of directing things. Okay. In terms of, it's much more than that. There's a lot of history going into this in terms of the American decline. But I believe the most likelihood is that we're stepping into an age where this unipolar dominance of American military and economic dominance is going away. And with the American leadership diminishing and our humiliation, quite frankly, in Afghanistan is going to impact Europe and all of the Western world. We're seeing the Western decline in terms of economy, military, etc., and we're seeing the rise primarily of China, secondarily of Russia, but we're seeing the rise of the residue of the old communist spirit. And with that will come the rise of radical Islamic nations such as Iran, because again, China and Russia are happy to be patrons and support and get behind nations like Iran, and even Afghanistan, even the Taliban. Eventually, we very well will see sort of a merger between the Taliban as well as the ISI, or basically Pakistan, of course, who have nuclear warheads. And I believe that this rise of Russia and China will empower and get behind and sort of support and lead to the rise of this Middle Eastern Islamic coalition of nations. Now, Turkey by itself is a very powerful military. Iran by itself is quite a formidable military. Pakistan with nuclear warheads, like that's a significant danger. All of them by themselves are significant threats. When they all come together, I believe that China and Russia, they're not aware of what's coming because it's so sort of unheard of. The reuniting of an ancient Islamic caliphate far greater than anything that we've seen previously. I believe that that will be something even far greater and more dangerous and more formidable than even China or Russia or any one of these. So I believe if, again, just from a sort of general geopolitical perspective, that's where we're heading. Now, let me talk specifically about Russia and Ukraine. I want to be very clear. I don't pretend to be an expert on this part of the world at all. In fact, for most Westerners, most Americans, they get on YouTube, they do a little research. I need to get a shirt, by the way. There's one of those shirts that says, YouTube is not research. And I say that as someone who's teaching on YouTube, but the reality is this is where a lot of people go to for information. And it's just a lot of sort of weekend warriors and folks that, they've got some handle on things and they watch some videos, they do some research, and some are very well read, and some of them are borderline experts. You can get some great information on YouTube, but it's also it's so sort of like unmoderated. Like you just don't know who you're listening to or what you're getting or this sort of thing. But the point is this, just by and large, most Americans, most Westerners, we're just not familiar with this part of the world at all. And so for my part, yes, I've watched a lot of videos, I've done a lot of research, I've tried to pay, but I've just dipped my toes in it. And I've listened to some dear friends that live in that part of the world that have a really good understanding of the nuances, of the complexity of that part of the world. And it's a very complex part of the world, like Eastern Europe, Russia, Poland, Ukraine, like that whole part of the world. I always joke whenever I'm speaking somewhere and I say, okay, raise your hand right away if you can name the nation that Melania Trump is from. And most Americans, Westerners, I know we're infamous for being very sort of illiterate when it comes to the world. They're like, Slovenia? Slovakia? One of those, I don't know. Serbia? Which is it? Like Eastern Europe is a fairly complicated place with a lot of different ethnic, religious, nationalistic things that are very complicated. These things are difficult. They're nuanced. So this is one of the main points I want to make, is that we're dealing with a very nuanced, complicated part of the world. So as I'm starting to speak here, I want to be very clear. I don't claim to have a solid grasp on all the nuances, but I think I have a pretty good grasp. I mean, in a very general, broad sense. And I'm speaking very generally. Now, I want to read a passage here before I sort of jump into the geopolitical analysis, because I want our focus here to be on the Word of God more than anything. And we're all familiar with this, Joshua chapter 5, verse 13 through 14. So Israel is coming up out of the desert. They're about to enter into the land of Canaan. Like it's a very significant turning point in the history of Israel, in the history of redemptive history. And it says, now it came about when Joshua, so now Joshua is leading, Moses is gone, Joshua is leading Israel into the promised land when he was by Jericho. So if you look at a map of Israel, you've got the Dead Sea, you come from the eastern side around the Dead Sea, and you start heading in across the north of the Dead Sea into Israel, you've got Jericho, the city of palms, the city of palm trees, and then sort of past Jericho, you get up toward the mountains, you head up into Jerusalem. This is the way that Israel entered into the promised land. It came about when Joshua was by Jericho that he lifted up his eyes, and behold, a man was standing opposite him with a sword drawn. So his sword drawn means like he's ready for war, right? In his hand. And Joshua went to him and he said, are you for us, or are you for our enemies, our adversaries? Whose side are you on? This is one of these passages, I'll be honest with you, it frustrates me. It has frustrated me in the past because I'm like, wait a minute, the Lord was clearly on Israel's side. Like they were called to go into the land and destroy their enemies and subjugate the Canaanites. Like clearly, and the Lord fought for them, he did. But here you have this example, he goes, whose side are you on? Are you for us or for them? And he said, no, rather I indeed come now as the captain of the Lord of hosts, the captain of the armies of God. And Joshua fell on his face and he bowed down and he said, what is my Lord? What have you to say to me? So it's a powerful picture. He goes like, okay, like he got it. He got the point here. And there's really kind of a much deeper spiritual thing here. Like when I say it frustrates me, it frustrates the politically minded, I'm going to say even slightly shallow spirit that I have. There's something deeper here, and Joshua got it, and he just said, okay, what have you to say? Like, you're here on behalf of heaven. You have heaven's perspective. And yes, like sort of on the surface, the Lord was fighting for Israel. He was against Israel's enemies. Like that narrative actually dominates the scriptures. But he goes, neither. I'm not on your side or their side. I'm serving a much deeper, a much greater, a much higher cause. It's way bigger than these teams, right? Like, oh, whose team are you on? You know, clearly the Lord is on the side of the Chiefs or whatever. You know, I know everybody gave me a hard time because I wore my Chiefs shirt, but you know, like, how dare you say that you're not on one of our sides? And this angel who is the captain of the Lord of hosts, like some people have even argued that this could be a pre-incarnate manifestation of Jesus, of God the Son. Like, you know, that's been discussed. He goes, I'm here on behalf of heaven. And Joshua fell on his face and he said, I'm listening. You know, and this is the attitude that I'm asking. Because listen, guys, I can't approach this without making people angry. We live in such a politicized, frenetic, just like angry moment in history. And I get it. There's really valid reasons for that. What I'm asking you, if you're listening, is saying, have ears to hear. Please hear what I'm saying. I know I'm going to upset some people because you can't approach this. Everyone is taking sides. Everyone's taking sides. Now, let me just talk about the way that most Americans and the West in general is approaching and understanding and looking to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. It's very simple. The primary mainstream media template for what's happening is Russia bad, the bad guys. Putin is the bad guy. The Russians are the bad guys, to the point where, you know, we're sanctioning, and I get it, like there's strategic reasons for putting sanctions on Russia. We're punishing the average Russian people. You're seeing Ukrainian restaurants in the United States that are being boycotted because they use a Russian name, because we don't like the Russians. You know, this is like beating up some Korean because, you know, you go, well, you're spreading the Wuhan virus because you're Asian, you know, and some like American Korean goes, I don't have anything to do with the, you know, the coronavirus, like this type of thing. Like it's this level of ignorance. But what happens at moments like this is everyone joins a team. So the popular American mainstream, Western mainstream media narrative is Russia bad, Ukraine is wonderful, and they're the heroes. Now, let me just say this. In a very broad sense, I agree with that general perspective. Okay, I feel as though the bad guy in all of this, first of all, it's Satan. But yes, the instigator is Putin. I think what's happening here is the ongoing residual demonic spirit of communism. And I believe he is functioning under that spirit. Again, I feel confident when I say this. Now, here's the thing. That's the mainstream media narrative. Now I want to step into a lot of the ideas that are exploding in our world on YouTube, and you're hearing it, you're seeing it on social media, which is the American, I'm going to say right-wing. Now, again, I'm right-wing, I'm conservative politically, but we're seeing a right-wing reaction against the mainstream media, and some of it is with good cause. Some of it is valid, But as is always the case, humans overreact. We react, and the pendulum swings to the opposite side of the spectrum, and we end up with an equally unbalanced perspective. So the right-wing response is this, is they go, well, since the mainstream, which is dominated by the left, narrative is that Ukraine good, Russian bad, they are basically becoming apologists for Russia and recycling a lot of Russian talking points, and even to the point of recycling Russian propaganda, and almost making like Putin out to be the hero. Now, within some that are pretty heavy into this, like the QAnon crowd, you're actually hearing, I'm seeing statements like this. No, actually, what's happening? Like, you have no idea what's happening. The reality is that this is what people are saying. I mean, this is one of the ideas that's floating around out there. Again, residual QAnon kind of stuff. That Putin is actually working with Trump. And the primary reason for the Russian invasion of Ukraine is to root out child human trafficking or drug trafficking type of things, and that Putin's actually a hero. He's the Christian warrior here. The whole narrative has been flipped. And you're actually seeing people claim this. And it's Biden and Hunter Biden, and they're in bed with Zelensky and this type of thing. So you're seeing that kind of, you're seeing like QAnon kind of stuff. Let me just say that is asinine. Trump is not behind the Russian invasion of Ukraine. He's not working with Putin. This is stupid, okay? Like, I'm sorry, like, I know as soon as you say that, you lose anyone that's there, and that's not how you win people. I get that. But I'm just saying, it's really, like, that's the bottom of the barrel. Now, then you get people who, and let me just say this too, and I probably shouldn't have just said it's stupid and all that, like that's just my carnal, but it is, it's dumb. After the past 2 years with the coronavirus and the sort of the mainstream media just parroting, being a mouthpiece for the CDC, for Fauci, and all of the way the information has changed and all of the deplatforming and all of this, like it's basically been similar to a Russian propaganda campaign where they're trying to control what to think and this and that. Like, I understand when people are extremely skeptical or reject whatever is the mainstream media narrative. But the world is complicated. Like, these people are not all conspiring together to lie to us. They're simply puppets. They are, to use the old Soviet era sort of tagline, they are useful idiots. They are just following the zeitgeist. They're following the spirit of this age. They're simply parroting, like again, the majority of them are more left-wing, and they're just reacting against what they perceive to be this very sort of shallow worldview, which is everything is Trump or Biden. It's Republicans, or like as if that's the only narrative through which to interpret every world event. And they just go along with what they see as their team. And yes, there's some people that are very deceitful and that type of thing, and I get that. But the idea that they're like terrorists that are working all together and conspiring, one big puppet master, like that's a very, very like drastically oversimplified view of the way the world works. The world is a very messy, complicated, nuanced place. It really is. But there are general trends that we can be aware of. Now, I get it when people react against the mainstream media narrative. Like, I get that. I'm a skeptic. I'm a very naturally skeptical person. But I'm equally skeptical of the conspiracy theories and the different alternative ideas as I am of the mainstream. I'm skeptical of everything. You see, here's the thing. If you hear some crazy idea, like you watch a video and people go, well, could it be this? And they ask a question, or you see a video and you go, well, that's different than what... If you just naturally embrace sort of the worst case scenario, then you're a conspiracy theorist. If you see it and go, wow, the world is not quite what it seems to be, and I'm willing to question and reconsider things, then you're a skeptic. Then you're, I hate to use this word, a Berean. But if you just automatically embrace the worst, you're a conspiracy theorist. We want to be skeptics. We want to be cautious. We don't want to be conspiracy theorists, which is to say we just willingly, willy-nilly embrace every like alternative idea. We want to be skeptical of those ideas just as well. But anyway, my point is this. I get it when people reject the mainstream media narrative. And in this case, there's very valid reasons to reject this neat and clean paradigm, which just says Putin, Russians, bad guys, Ukrainians, all good guys. Now, we're also seeing people, I've seen people say this, like they'll show a video of Zelensky back when he was a comedian, naked playing the guitar or like playing a piano with his penis or something like this. And, you know, like people go, look at this guy, he's an ungodly, you know, like pagan. But Putin, he's a Christian. As if that justifies a foreign invasion. I go, okay, like that's not the type of behavior, like my humor is one thing, but that's not my sense of humor, but that doesn't justify an invasion. Okay, so like there's different levels of how people are justifying what's happening with Russia. Now let me talk about some stuff that I think is really valid in terms of some of the videos and different things that are floating around. Because let me just say this before I dig any deeper. With any conflict, we're dealing with humans. All humans are sinners. All nations are imperfect. All cultures and peoples are imperfect. But there are some that are much better than others. There are some ideologies that are far more demonic and rooted in demonic history than others. Okay, like the United States, you know, like the principles that are in our Constitution, the founding documents of freedom, of liberty, of equality. Like, yeah, we fall short all the time. But those principles, I'm going to use this word, and this drives people crazy, they are superior to many of the principles that are built into, for example, Islamic law. You know, that says things like a woman is only half as valid, her testimony is only half as valid in court. Like, our culture, our ideology here in the West would say, no, a woman is just as valid as a man. Islamic, which claims to be from God, law says that a woman's testimony is only half as valid. And you can even see the hadith, the tradition of Muhammad. He says, Muhammad said, because they are deficient in intelligence. He actually says that. I will, you know, put both of my legs and arms and my neck on the table when I say this. American principles, Western, which are rooted in Judeo-Christian principles, are superior to Islamic principles. The same can be said for most of the principles that are in the very foundations of communist ideology. Western ideology, again, rooted largely in a Judeo-Christian ethic, is superior to the spirit behind communism and Islam. Okay, let me just be very clear. People hate the word superior because we've been brainwashed by religious and cultural relativity, which says that everything's equal for the past, 50 years. Like the Western world has been brainwashed. Our ability to think critically in a legitimately nuanced way, our Achilles tendon has been cut. And we're just like so ashamed of who we are. And when you use the word superior, people they go, what is this guy, a white supremacist? This has nothing to do with ethnicity or race whatsoever. It has to do with values. And so absolutely, I will say, Western culture is superior. And so in a very general sense, again, let me just say this, I feel as though in this story, Putin is the primary antagonist. He's the primary bad guy. But does that mean that the Ukrainians are all heroic and all perfect? I like Zelensky from what I've seen. I don't know much about him. I love some of the gutsy things that he's doing. I love the way he's leading. I'm watching it. And in that sense, I somewhat agree with the Western mainstream media narrative, and they're presenting him as a hero. Do I think he's perfect? Absolutely not. Do I think he's like some heroic? No, I mean, he's actually more of a secular Jew. Do I think he's, embodying Judeo-Christian principles? In some of the things that he's doing, he's being very righteous. Now, on the other hand, Putin uses Eastern Orthodox, Russian Orthodox Christianity as sort of his facade to present himself as what he's doing is all righteous. I think it's a cynical ploy for power. I think the spirit operating behind him is the same demonic spirit that was behind communism. And now, this is just an example. Even as I'm talking, it's almost like I can hear the objections. People go, oh, Joel, you're trying to say you're perfect? Yeah, so he is a Christian. Putin's a Christian. He's just an Eastern Orthodox Christian. And you're a hypocrite too. You're not perfect. I go, yeah, I'm not perfect. Let's be very clear. I have massive deficiencies in my life. Absolutely. Before I'm trying to get the splinter out of someone else's eye, I want to be very introspective and aware of the log in my own eye. I can tell you right off the top of my head, I swear too much. There's issues that I have real conviction of the Holy Spirit on my life right now, and I'm going, I need to work on this. On some other areas, I'm doing really good, on some of the big important issues. I'm not going to get into all my personal life, but you get the point. But here's the thing, guys. I don't have a sex palace. Okay, like Putin has built for himself, a place that he can go away and, you know, and bring in whatever strippers or prostitutes or whatever he does. You know, like I haven't poisoned those that I disagree with. I haven't assassinated my political antagonists. I haven't invaded a foreign country. So like, I get it to say like, hey, I'm not perfect, so how can you? No, the spirit that he is operating under is demonic, okay? It is demonic. And I want to be so careful to try to like validate anything that he's doing whatsoever. And I think Christians should be extremely careful, those on the right that are validating what he's doing. I've heard people, you know, again, I'm going through the different levels of the way that people are justifying Putin. Well, he's working with Trump, or he's doing this, and now like everyone's emphasizing the biolabs. There was a Russian spokesman for one of the Russian generals, I was looking at the video today, that was saying, no, the Americans are working on bioweapons and that they're going to use migratory birds to spread these viruses across Russia. And I go, like, there's all kinds of these crazy conspiracy theories that are out there. We need to be careful of parroting Russian propaganda, quite frankly. Now, let me just say this, but are the Ukrainians perfect? Absolutely not. Guys, I don't know how many of you have tracked with this and like really understand this, but there are very legitimate, and these are sort of the talking points that Putin is using. There is a contingent, a section within the Ukrainian nation, really over in the Donbass region. Okay, so this is sort of you've got people there, some that are Russian, some that are Ukrainian, so there's sort of that national ethnic tension of allegiance to either Russia or Ukraine. It's sort of a disputed territory. You've got a group there called the Azov Battalion. So this is a group literally that started out as a bunch of neo-Nazi white supremacists, and they eventually actually became part of the like Ukrainian National Guard, like given awards by the president of the country. And you go like, well, yeah, you can do that in the United States too. Like, you know, there's some neo-Nazis down in the Appalachians or no, like this is an actual battalion that is part of the Ukraine. And like the founder of this organization actually was elected as part of the Ukrainian parliament. Like there is a contingency, quite frankly, of neo-Nazis. Now they'll deny and say, well, we're not really Nazis. And you go, the very insignia that you use for your battalion, the tattoos, all of the gestures that they make, these are neo-Nazis. Like I'm not stupid. Like anyone that watches this goes, these guys are neo-Nazis. And there's a contingent of people within Ukraine that actually, you know, sort of support them because they're fighting on behalf of the Ukrainian nationalist cause. Or they turn a blind eye and they go, yeah, these guys are a bunch of jerks. We disagree with them, but at least they're on our side. But see, what's happening is in the world of YouTube and the way that this whole sort of new information revolution, the way things work, is people will watch some of this, again, on the more Western conservative, who don't understand all of the complexities of this part of the world, and suddenly they start painting Putin as the good guy and Ukraine as the bad guys. And this is what I mean by teams. This is why I wanted to quote this from Joshua. Guys, as Christians, our primary job right now is not to try to choose teams. Now, again, in general, I'm generally going to say right now, Putin is the bad guy, and I'm going to stand with the Ukrainians. Absolutely. Again, I'm an American. Yes, I have all my biases and so forth, but I believe that what I'm standing for is much more righteous. But again, I just want to reiterate, our primary focus right now should not be on trying to figure out who the good guys and the bad guys are. Here's the reality is, we're all good guys and bad guys. The Holy Spirit is in me, but I still have sin. Like, it's a complex world. The world is a very complex place, and especially Eastern Europe. Now, is one side much more worthy of standing with than the other? Yes, absolutely. Again, I want to reiterate that. Like I'm going back and forth to qualifying this, and I hope I'm not overqualifying it, but our main focus as Christians should not primarily be trying to figure out who the good guys and the bad guys are. What does it mean prophetically? Who should I stand with in all of this? Our primary focus right now as believers should be walking in a manner worthy of the calling that the Lord has placed on us. Our primary focus should be on walking righteously. Please hear me. And I know I talk a lot, guys, and I know I've been rambling. Our primary focus should be on walking righteously in an age of confusion, of chaos, of hatred and bloodshed, because it's going to get a lot worse. I've watched the nation of Syria as that thing spiraled out of control. And this is the age that we're in. You know, like I broke my back years ago. I've got a really bad back. I know what it's like when, you know, you pull a muscle and then all of a sudden there's just this cascading, snowballing effect. Now the spine's being pulled because the muscle goes into spasm. Now the spine's being pulled over here. Now the disc is bulging. What's the original problem? You know, and this is what always happens. What is the original source? Is it the muscle? Is it the spine? Is it the disc? And this is what we're dealing with right now. And people go, yeah, but the real original source of the problem is this or that, or, you know, and we can do that forever. Once the bloodshed starts flowing, guys, it's amazing. In a time of war, everyone starts joining in. And as Christians, we need to be so careful not to be quick to jump in taking sides, but to say, Lord, what am I doing? How am I walking righteously in this age of cascading, snowballing nightmare, which the last days will be? We think the last days are going to be this neat, clean period where this is the right side, this is the bad side. No, it's going to become more messy, more chaotic, more confusing, more bloody. And we have to have clarity that our job is not primarily about choosing political sides. Our job is primarily about saying, Lord, how can I walk worthy before you? How can I not focus primarily on the splinter in someone else's eye, but in my own life? Because deception is going to be the spirit of the day, and there is going to be a great falling away. And once the bloodshed starts flowing, it is so easy to get just pulled into the hatred, get pulled into the division, the political spirit, the zeitgeist of this age. And next thing you know, you're not even walking with the Lord. And this is my heart. This is like, I'm just like really genuinely passionate about this right now. I'm just going to read a couple verses, a few passages, and wrap this up, guys. There's disinformation everywhere. It's so hard to untangle this. You can spend your whole life just sitting on the internet trying to figure it out and gain clarity, and you can spend your time doing that, and it's okay to do it a little bit. But our primary focus right now in this age, as this sort of curtain of darkness potentially is falling on the earth, we need to spend far more time in the Word than on the internet. I've said this before. It's so easy to get up in the morning and open the laptop, start answering your emails, this and that, and reading the news. I've made it a discipline in my life. I get up in the morning and I open the Word of God. I want that to be the first thing in my life, because what starts out is just simple, like I want to know what's going on in the world. That can so quickly suck you, because the division, the partisanship, the extremism, the reactionism that's out there, it can pull you off track so quickly. We need to be in the Word first and foremost. We need to be abiding in the vine. If there's ever a time that it's so critical that we are connected to Him, and how easy and how seductive it is to get pulled into all of these conflicts. I see it with my kids. You know, they get in a fight, and everything in me as a dad wants to jump in and mediate. And then I go, no, stay away. Because as soon as you jump in, now it's a three-way fight. You know, right now there's a two-way fight. I jump in, you know, like this is the moment that we're in. Everybody's fighting. And all these Christians, we're just so quick to jump into the fight. We need to have that spirit and say, Lord, we're listening. We're listening right now. Ephesians chapter 4, 1 through 6. Paul says, therefore I, as a prisoner of the Lord, he's in prison when he says this, I implore you, like with the spirit of a father, he says, I implore you, walk in a manner worthy of the calling with which you have been called. Like, guys, we have been called to something so much deeper, so much more substantial than all of this nonsense, all of this fighting around us, and it's going to get so much more worse. The calling that we have, if we could see it, if we could grasp it, the eternal nature of it all, and we're fighting in the mud, like we're so quick to jump into the mud, like, and look, I'm guilty of this myself. The calling, walk in a manner worthy of the calling with which we've been called, with all humility and gentleness, patience, showing tolerance for one another and love, being diligent, being deliberate. Like, guys, you don't float upstream. Like I've said this so many times, you have to fight your way upstream. Like it's just the natural tendency is we float downstream and we think like, oh, yeah, you have to be deliberate and be disciplined and determined. Like everything in my own life, like let me just say this, like I don't listen to a lot of Christian music. I'll just be honest with you. I love like I shouldn't say this because people get all mad at me. I love like jam bands and bluegrass and stuff that for the most part is pretty innocuous. And a lot of it is just instrumental. I have a tendency, because of my personality, like I can very easily just listen to, I'll just call it very selfish, juvenile, melancholy, self-indulgent, like just more like depressing music. I can so easily find myself just naturally listening because I probably have sort of more of a melancholy personality. I have to be deliberate, especially right now in this sort of season of my life, to listen to more upbeat, positive music, you know, even just tempo and all that type of thing. And I have to be deliberate about it. Like so I hate to use this word. I'll just say, I'll use this phrase because again, everyone will get mad at me. It's very popular right now in sort of like new age therapeutic circles, mindfulness. Mindfulness. All I mean by that is this. We need to be aware of the things that we're passively allowing ourselves to take in and look at and participate in. We need to be aware, conscious, deliberate, disciplined, because if we don't, we're going to get pulled downstream so fast. Like the current is rising, the river is rising. We need to put things in our life that will help us to fight our way upstream. To fight our way, we need to be diligent. Being diligent, like being deliberate to preserve the unity of the Spirit and the bond of peace. Guys, there are believers, there are brothers and sisters in Russia. There are brothers and sisters in the Ukraine. And it's amazing, you know, you talk to them and like the Russians are, you know, going like, hey, Americans, be careful of how you analyze it. You know, like we're so quick to talk about all these things. And again, I shared my opinion. I don't claim to have clarity on all of this, but I feel as though my position is relatively accurate. We need to be aware of the higher calling, the higher kingdom that we're part of, and the ultimate goals that are our goals. His goals are our goals. I'm going to read Colossians 1, 9 through 12. For this reason also, Paul says, since the day that we heard of it, this is like one of these incredibly beautiful high apostolic prayers, we have not ceased to pray for you. One of the things in my life, I'll say this, I have a pretty good prayer life, but I'm constantly convicted that I don't pray enough. Like one of the main things that we need to be about, again, is we need to be abiding in the vine. How do you abide in Jesus? How are you connected with him on a regular daily basis? How do you connect with anyone? You have to communicate with them. You have to talk to them. When you don't talk to someone, the relationship breaks, right? Like when you're in communication, in prayer, that's the ultimate way that we abide in the vine. If we're not abiding in the vine, one, we're not going to bear fruit, but we're just going to dry up and fall away, quite frankly. And so prayer, like just the conviction in my life that I need to be focused more on prayer and less on expressing my opinions and, you know, doing all these other things. Like we need to be in prayer in these days. We've not ceased to pray for you and to ask that you would be filled with the knowledge of his will in all spiritual, like that deeper spiritual heavenly wisdom and understanding, so that you will walk, again, here it is, walk in a manner worthy of the Lord. It's just weighing on me what that is to walk in a manner worthy of our calling, worthy of the Lord, to please him in all respects, bearing fruit in every good work and increasing in the knowledge of him, in the knowing of him, not just knowing about him, the knowledge of God, to increase in our relationship with him, to increase in the degree to which we know him, strengthened with all power according to his glorious might for the attaining of and here's what it boils down to, guys, more than anything, for the attaining of steadfastness and patience, endurance, patient endurance, long-suffering. Like this is the word right now I feel for this hour. Patience, steadfastness, long-suffering, endurance. We're getting to the end of the race. We're getting toward the end of the race. This is the time when, you know, in the marathon where people, they've run strong up until this point and then they fall off. The finish line is just ahead. joyously giving thanks to the Father, who has qualified us to share in the inheritance of the saints of light. Like the calling that we have, if we could see it and feel it, now's not the time to become lax. 1 Thessalonians 2:11 through 12, Paul says, you know how when we were with you, we were exhorting and encouraging, and this is what we're called to do right now. And by the grace of God, beyond all the geopolitical analysis and all my talk, that you would hear this exhortation. You would hear this, as he said, I implore you, like I appeal to you, each one of you as a father, like Paul goes, as a father, as he would appeal to and exhort his own children, so that you would walk in a manner worthy of the God who calls you into his kingdom and glory, the radiant, shining glory of God. Like the calling, the kingdom that we're part of is so superior to all of this nonsense, all of this demonic chatter and chaos and bloodshed, and it's about to get a lot worse. Beloved, we need to focus on walking in a manner worthy, walking righteously in this age, as I said, of chaos, of confusion, of just the information. It's crazy that with more information, it's harder to understand what in the world's going on and what the truth is. Like if anything that we've learned from the past 2 years with the pandemic and all this is that understanding the truth is complicated. And it's not about necessarily understanding the truth. Like we can try and ferret it out and dig into it all like for hours and hours and hours a day. Our primary calling is to focus in a disciplined, deliberate, mindful way, to be aware, to be conscious of what we're giving our time to, what we're giving our spirits to. Because if we don't, again, the river's rising and we're going to pull downstream. But by the grace of God, absolutely, his strength is there. Not just for making it upstream, but doing it with strength, doing it with steadfastness, with diligence. The grace is absolutely there, and I'm confident that by the grace of God, you and I will get there together. So I'm going to end it right here. And I hope that what I communicated was clear. So, all right, friends, God bless you all. I'm looking forward to Dalton's sort of piggybacking on all of this, and I trust it will be tremendously helpful and edifying as well. So bless you all, friends, and look forward to seeing you next time. Maranatha.